The bell in Bitter Creek tolled once, low, heavy, and final. Doors stilled on their hinges. Cards froze in midair. Somewhere a dog whimpered under a porch. The sound rolled over the town like thunder over dry prairie, and every eye swung to the leaning courthouse at the edge of Main Street, where a trial waited to decide whether truth had any place left in this country. Elias Crane came in with the dusk, a man built of bone, grit, and quiet. His horse moved like it knew how far hope could carry a body, and no further. Crane slid down, favoring a limp that had traveled with him since the war. He wore plain black, dust-chalked at the seams, and carried a scuffed satchel that never left his hand. People watched from behind half-latched shutters and the reflection-slick windows of the Dry Gulch Saloon. No one called his name, but whispers darted like sparrows. That him? The witness. Bitter Creek looked like a town put together by stubbornness. A windmill creaked on the hill, turning slow against a sky the color of hammered tin. The church steeple leaned, the blacksmith's forge stood cold, and the livery smelled of old hay and older secrets. Crane tied off his horse, paused to rub its neck, and then walked toward the boarding house with the kind of patience that comes after you've learned not to run from pain. Inside, the landlady poured coffee that tasted like boiled iron and set him a bowl of beans. A girl carried it, brown-eyed, sunburned, a braid falling down her back like a rope no one should ever climb. She couldn't have been more than 16, but there was too much knowing in her stare. "You're the one," she said softly. Crane took a breath. "I'm a man come to speak." "My pa was Samuel Miller," she said. The name hung there. "He wrote a letter before the fire. If you've got it, then you've got me standing beside it." Crane held her gaze. "I've carried your father's words longer than I've carried anything that wasn't bone. I didn't come to let them fall." Outside, boots scuffed on boards. Men posted themselves where men post themselves when money hires fear, corners, shadows, doorways with a view on every window. Silas Garrick's brand burned on half the cattle this side of the divide and on the half of the town that owed him for roofs and seed. It wasn't law Garrick kept in his pocket. It was the 12 hungry hearts who'd sit the jury till they remembered whose beef fed their table. The morning of the testimony, the courthouse smelled of tobacco spit and sawdust. Ceiling fans ticked like bored vultures. Judge Harper sat stooped behind the bench, a good man worn to the knuckle by years of compromise. Garrick took his place at the defense table, silver-tipped cane leaning just so against his chair, suit oiled black as a crow's wing. He wore the smile of a man who'd bought himself a storm and expected it to rain only where he pointed. Crane walked to the stand, hat in hand, satchel against his ribs. He raised his right hand, swore in a voice that didn't shake, and laid the satchel down. From it he drew an envelope crackled brown by sun and years. Samuel Miller's handwriting ran urgent and slanted across the paper, a man trying to outrun fire with ink. Crane read without ornament. Dates, threats, fence lines cut in the night, voices heard outside the window, a promise murmured by someone who thought a whisper was smaller than a bullet. Take the land or burn them out. He read the name that letter carried like a brand, Silas Garrick. A sound moved through the room that wasn't quite breath and wasn't quite prayer. The jury shifted the way cattle shift when lightning crawls. Garrick's lawyer stood, polished and slick. "So the story goes," he said, "but a dead man's letter ain't proof. And this." He flung a hand at Crane's limp, slow as cruelty. "This is a drifter's tale. My client feeds this town. My client employs it. You'd hang the harvest on the word of a man who owns nothing but old pain." Crane said nothing. He closed the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and watched 12 pairs of eyes look anywhere but at him. The judge called for deliberation. The jurors filed out in a hush heavy as a church after a sin. That should have been the longest hour of Crane's life, but another knocked first. After sundown, steps came to his door, hesitant, carrying the weight of someone who'd always worn his conscience like a rock in his boot. Sheriff Abel Marlowe stepped into the lamplight, hat twisting between his hands as if trying to wring rain from it. "I can't sleep with it," he said. He put a leather journal on Crane's table, the cover cracked, edges fretted white. "I wrote it down because writing is what a man does when he can't look his neighbor in the eye. Orders. Names." Dates. A tally of the things I didn't stop. Crane opened it. The words had no music, and that's how you knew they were true. A list of bribes pressed under a handshake. A barn torched on a moonless night. A jury list arranged in the back room of a saloon. 3 men told to ride with kerosene to the Miller cabin and bring back ashes. Garrick's name marched through the lines like a general that history would someday deny. Why give it to me now? Crane asked. Because your reading today showed me the one thing I didn't put in those pages, Marlowe said. My shame. It don't belong to me anymore if it can do right in someone else's hands. The sheriff left without asking for absolution. Crane sat until the lamp coughed and went to smoke. He thought of the girl's eyes, of Samuel Miller's last scrawl, of towns he'd left behind where truth had arrived late and been buried with the dead. He slid the journal into his satchel and felt the weight shift, not lighter, not heavier, just honest. Morning brought a sky pared clean by wind. The jurors filed back with faces pale as unbaked dough. Not guilty, the foreman said, and no one was surprised except those who still believed that truth spoke loud enough to be heard over the sound of coins. Garrick stood as if to accept to him. He touched his cane to the floor, a tap that a man who knew him might hear as a signal, and favored the crowd with a smile that asked them to remember where their next meal came from. Crane rose before the judge could lift his gavel. Your Honor, he said, the court has my word, and the town has heard it, but there's a record you've not yet considered. It don't come from a drifter's memory. It comes from the hand of the law. He placed the journal on the bench. Pages fell open to lines written in the cramped hand of a man who had learned to hide his truth small. Judge Harper bent close. He read, and you could see a thing in him try and stand back up. He motioned to the bailiff. The book went to the jury, one set of eyes to the next, a slow contagion of understanding. Garrick's smile thinned. The cane tapped twice now, sharper. Men at the back straightened as if hearing a sermon in another language. Hands drifted toward holsters that proud wives had polished that very morning. You could smell the storm coming, grease and powder and the sour sweat of fear. The first shot cracked wood from the gallery rail. Screams tore the quiet like canvas. Crane pulled the judge down behind the bench and felt splinters hop across his cheek. The sheriff, face gone tight but steady, drew his revolver with the stiffness of someone who'd promised his hand to the truth, no matter where it led. They fired measured and low, a rhythm learned by men who understood that bullets aren't fast enough to outpace regret.